So lastly for this week, we're going to look at marine bony fishes. You've learned about jawless fish, you've learned about the cartilaginous fish, so now we're going to look at the fish that have true calcified bones in their bodies. And so bony fishes includes a category called lobe fins, which we're going to look at first, and the type of fish in this category are called coelacanths. And coelacanths are pretty amazing because they were actually thought to be extinct until someone found one fairly recently, which is pretty amazing. So you're actually going to do a case study this week about the coelacanths, so you'll learn a whole lot more about them then. But what makes coelacanths sort of distinct or interesting compared to other bony fish? They have sort of rod-shaped bones, and so their bones are a little bit more rigid. Very thick muscle back in their caudal fin, which is a little bit different from other fish as well. And these guys actually have cartilage and bone. So there might be kind of a link between a common ancestor with current cartilaginous fish. These guys live in deep, cold waters, sometimes submerged caves, and so that's why nobody had come across them, and they were thought to be extinct because they live in a place where very few people can actually explore. They can be as long as about 6 or 7 feet, which is pretty amazing. They're huge. And they will eat just about everything. They'll eat smaller sharks, squid, and other fish. And these guys also have a rostral organ, kind of similar to something the sharks have, and that detects electrical currents in the water. So the coelacanth is the first organism we're going to check out in the category of bony fish because that's something you're going to be doing a case study on as well. So the more common bony fish you're thinking of are called ray-finned fish. And ray fins meaning that their fins have kind of this fan-like appearance to them. And there's over 26,000 named species of these fish. So these are the dominant group of vertebrates in the ocean. There's more fish in the ocean than any other vertebrates. And there's sort of two big groups of these guys. And we're not going to get into the details too much, but I just wanted to point out the difference. And that has to do with their tails or their caudal fins. So if the caudal fin is heterosecral, that means that the upper lobe is larger than the lower lobe. So you remember how we talked about that with cartilaginous fish? So these tend to be fish that live, again, in shallow water. Sometimes they're kind of slower swimmers. They're not going to be like the big, fast tuna that you're thinking of that are really fast in the ocean. But they're similar to sharks. And these guys actually have cartilage a little bit reinforced in their skeleton as well. The other category have what are called homosecral tails. So in this case, the lobes of the caudal fin are the same on the top and the bottom. And these guys have different scales as well. These have kind of thinner, more flexible and fragile scales, whereas the heterosecral tail group has kind of thick, heavy scales. So that's just two different groups that we could divide them into. And you don't need to know the names. The names are a little bit confusing, but you should know why they're divided up. That it's mostly by the tail, the tails being either different upper lobe from bottom lobe or the same upper lobe and bottom lobe. So other characteristics, so we're going to get into some terminology here about their fins. Bony fish have what are called median fins, which includes the dorsal fin, caudal fin, anal fins if they have them, and then the tail fins. And these are for stability. So these will be stability and propulsion as well. Their tail fin or their caudal fin will help provide propulsion for the fish. And so median fins are highlighted here in yellow. Paired fins, and I think there's something wrong here with this highlighting. So the yellow should be for the median fins, not for the paired fins. So the yellow applies to the median fins, dorsal, caudal, and anal. And then the paired fins are the pectoral fins, the pelvic fins, and these are involved in steering. So when you think of steering, you think of the pectoral fins and the pelvic fin, and the other fins are all involved with stability or propulsion in the case of the tail fin. So some other important things about fish, their teeth are set in their jaw. They don't regrow teeth constantly the way sharks do. And obviously, fish are a huge, huge part of human life, a big industry and a big source of food worldwide. In some parts of the world, fish are the dominant or even the only source of protein. So some interesting information about their body shapes and how it relates to where they live and what they do. Their body shape kind of determines how well the fish moves through the water and also where it can hide and where it can be found. So the shape that's the most common for big open water swimmers is the fusiform shape. And fusiform is a long streamlined, if you look at it from the front, they're just one long tube shape. And these are the big open water fast swimmers like sharks, tuna, and marlin. I'm saying sharks even though sharks are not a bony fish. They're cartilaginous fish, but they fit into the category of having a fusiform body shape. So they get put in there too. Um, Another body shape would be the depressed or the flattened body. So these would be bottom dwellers like the flounder. What's interesting about the flounder is that they're actually born when they hatch with one eye on either side of their face. But as they grow into adulthood, they become flattened to where they're not flattened evenly. It's like one whole side of their face is facing upward. And so the eye actually migrates and moves to the top. So now both eyes are on one side. It's pretty weird. So anyway, that would be an example of a depressed or flattened body shape from the front. Laterally compressed is kind of similar, but in this case the fish remains upright. It's not lying on its side on the bottom. So these would be flattened bodies. They might live in seagrass beds or reefs, and they can hide easily in little cracks and crevices and rocks and coral if they have this kind of body shape. Globular, these guys tend to be kind of bottom dwellers and more sedentary. So these guys are not swimming a lot. They spend most of their time hiding under things. So the anglerfish, the toadfish, the scorpionfish, so these guys have more of a sedentary lifestyle. So we'll talk about coloration as well. The coloration patterns on fish, like with any animal, have a couple different purposes, either camouflage or sexual attraction, or to serve as a warning against predators. Two big color types. There are pigments that are found in what are called chromatophores. So pigments, for example, your skin has pigments in it. Pigments can be changed by moving the cells where they're found. So for example, a squid or an octopus has something similar. It has chromatophores, and it basically can become dark or become bright based on how they change the size of those cells, those chromatophores. And so they can move them either by way of their nervous system or hormones that stimulate them. And that can give them a dark appearance and then suddenly a light appearance. Melanins and carotenoids are two types of pigments that are pretty common. And then there's structural colors, and these are basically like iridescent light reflectors. And these are called iridophores, and they're colorless, but they can give off this kind of iridescent shimmer. And so those might be another type of way that fish can color themselves. In the open ocean, we have an interesting color pattern that we see with not only fish, but with other open ocean animals as well. So think of sharks, think of whales and dolphins too, who are mammals, and they have the same type of color pattern. It's called obliterative countershading, where the animal is basically dark on the top, on its back, and then white on the underside. And here's an example here with this tuna. So think about why that might be. Why would it be beneficial for these animals to be dark on the top and light on the bottom? And so I'll let you think about that one and do a little bit of research because that's an interesting question. Another type of coloration is called disruptive coloration, and that's where the lines or the patterns will basically interrupt the background color. And that can kind of basically confuse a predator. It'll give it kind of a distorted sense of the size and shape of the prey, and so they won't be able to be caught as easily. And sometimes they even have a fake eye spot on their body. So for the predator, if they see an eye here, an eye here, they'll be a little confused as to which direction that fish is about to move and would potentially miss them and not eat them. So very tricky. Then there's what we call poster colors. This is where we have bright, showy colors that are meant to be a warning for predators, or it might even be to advertise mating for females. Cryptic coloration is camouflage. There's lots of examples of that one you can imagine. So that would be the idea is to not be seen and to blend in. So we'll talk motion here for a minute, how fish swim. Same concept as with the sharks. You have these trunk muscles that push back and forth and side to side, and that gives them that strength in their tail or caudal fin to move it side to side. Breathing, respiration. Fish, of course, have gills that extract oxygen from the water And they also, in their gill system, help balance out salt, and so they can osmoregulate a little bit that way too. So the gill filaments are found in here, and they're red. The red is because that's where there's a lot of blood passing across on the inside of the tissue, and that's how oxygen gets delivered into their bloodstream, is that the blood is pretty much ready to go right underside the gill. And there's a lot of myoglobin, oftentimes, is a type of protein transported in the blood that helps to hold on to oxygen. And so that's the deep red color you see in the gills. So the way gills work, water moves across the gills counteractive to the blood flow to maximize diffusion. So basically, water moves, if the water's moving in this direction, like this, across the gills are going to be oriented perpendicular, or kind of in the opposite orientation, to maximize the amount of surface area and the amount of water that flows over them. And that will then, of course, maximize how much oxygen is being delivered into the blood. So fish have a pretty remarkable way of getting oxygen through their body quickly. And what happens is, if you've had fish in a tank as a pet, you've seen how they open and close their mouth as they're moving. And what they're doing is pumping water in. So when their mouth is open, they pump water into their mouth. It's also called their buccal chamber, which expands. And then that push, as they close their mouth, it pushes the water down and across the gills. So water gets shunted along and pushed really quickly down across the gills. So that constant opening and closing of their mouths was necessary for them to be able to breathe. Now, I didn't mention this before with sharks, but I should have. Sharks don't do this. Sharks cannot pump water across their gills. What they have instead is something called ram ventilation, where they have their mouths open as they swim the whole time. And basically, by moving through the water and moving water into their mouth that way, they get water across their gills. They can't pump it, they just have to ram it basically by swimming. And so if sharks stop swimming, they will suffocate. They will die because they will not be able to get enough oxygen. So that's a fun fact about a difference between sharks and bony fish. So here's another interesting look at their osmoregulating ability. So fish take in salt water, of course, to get oxygen, but their bodies can't metabolize that much salt. And so what they do for osmoregulating, they basically are able to hold the salt inside their body and excrete it through very, very dilute urine. So their urine is actually pretty concentrated in salt, so that they're not losing much fresh water. They're able to get rid of the salt without getting rid of too much fresh water, and it helps them to keep a good osmotic balance in their body. So buoyancy. Sharks, again, I'm talking about sharks even though this is bony fish, but just to compare, they're actually denser than seawater, so they'll sink if they don't swim. And they deal with it with this little oil called squalene, and that's something that they can be hunted for. As you can see, squalene has become a big popular item especially in beauty markets. Apparently it can make your skin really soft or something. So squalene, but bony fish have something else. They use a swim bladder, and so their swim bladder is what helps them deal with their buoyancy by basically extracting some of the air, some of the oxygen out of their bloodstream that they got from pumping it across their gills. And they take that oxygen and they have this gas chamber that they can kind of inflate and deflate in order to keep their bodies buoyant. Another way fish can do this is sometimes you'll see them actually go up and gulp air from the surface. And if you ever see them do that, they're not doing that to breathe. They're doing that just to get some air inside their swim bladder and to deal with buoyancy better. Some deep sea fish lack that. Their body density system is a little bit different, so they don't quite need it. Their nervous system, fish can smell very well. They have very heightened olfactory glands and taste receptors too. They can taste really well. And what's also neat is they have what's called a lateral line system for hearing, where they basically have this long lines running through their body with little tubes and very, very sensitive little fibers like hairs, so that a vibration in the water gets transported through this system, and these tiny little sense hairs can feel it, and so they can detect very, very small vibrations in the water. It's pretty amazing that they can do that. So that's the lateral line. So anyway, this is also something kind of neat. These are otoliths. These are basically ear stones that come from fish. And so those can help us to determine in the fossil record how old certain fish were. Their vision, it kind of varies. Some are better than others. I think we'll